So you would think that as often as you see me up here with a mic in my hand, I wouldn't be nervous, but I'm definitely nervous. Evidence of that is when your hands are like icebergs. So I am a child of God. I'm a daughter of the Most High King, but I didn't always know that. I didn't always relate that as my identification. I was born into a home where my parents were not Christians. In fact, I'm a first-generation Christian in my family. My father was a functional alcoholic that never really identified himself as an alcoholic. And I have a pretty extensive recall. I can remember things from when I was about 18 months old in vivid detail that I can relate to my mother, and she's like, how do you remember that? I don't know. God-given thing, I guess. I don't know. And that can be good and that can be bad. So I do have vivid remembrances of my dad in a drunken state, and you never knew what you were going to get out of that. Happy, mad, whatever. And it was not a harmonious home life always because of his drinking. Other than that, I was raised in a very loving environment on my father's side of the family. My family have been in the same location for generations. My great-great-grandfather homesteaded where we now live, and my family home that I was raised in, we now own. And my mother and myself, my mother was the one who would take us to church. I don't really remember exactly how old I was when we began going to church, but I do have a memory of about 5 being back in the church nursery with who we referred to as Granny Reed. She was our next door neighbor across the street. She was no relation to us whatsoever, but she was Granny to us. My biological granny had died when I was 2.5 years old, my first introduction to death. And my dad's family were a very tight-knit family. They didn't do good things together, but they had each other's back in it. They would have literally laid down their life for one another, and there are stories to tell of things they did do for one another that were not so great. They worked together, always. There were 6 children, 5 boys, 1 girl, and the girl was as rough tumble as the boys and determined to prove herself. So when I was 9, I came to know the Lord through lots of seeking. I was very curious. I was the child that had a moral conscience that I was not a rule breaker. I didn't like others to be rule breakers. I'm the oldest grandchild, so I was left in charge a whole lot, and I'd be like, why'd you do that? But I also was asked, why did you let them do that? So I just was not a rule breaker. My brother, on the other hand, tempted fate a lot, let's just say that. And so I came to know the Lord when I was 9. We were having a revival service. Brother Percy Ray, amazing man of God. He was probably in his 80s at that time. And I don't know, I connected with, he just mesmerized me with his teachings. And I was already asking lots of questions about what did it mean to be saved, and why did people get baptized, and all those questions. So my mother and I both came to know the Lord about that same time. And I can't really recall exactly if she accepted Christ before I did or vice versa. I don't remember. But I'd like to tell you that my life was rosy, peachy keen after that. Everything was just wonderful, great, and good, but that's not realistic in a sinfully fallen world. My father had an opposition to church attendance for himself. He, however, never, had a problem with Mom. In fact, he encouraged Mom to take my brother and I to church. He, however, himself was not at all interested in going to church. And I can remember praying for him because in my limited knowledge as a child, I just knew that if something happened to him, I wouldn't see him in heaven. And I loved my dad, and I desired for him to know the Lord. It was such a joyful thing in my heart when I received Christ. I wanted that for my dad, and I can remember praying for him every single night. As a preteen, probably, is when I got started with that. So when I was 12, my mother was expecting another brother. Didn't know it was a brother, of course, at the time, until he was born, but he did not survive. My mother was high-risk pregnancy. She had cesarean sections, and back then they were pretty severe. They're not done anything like that now, but her uterus ruptured before he could be delivered, and the baby did not survive, and my mother came very, very near to death. And I was so confused. Like, I was so excited about this baby. Being 12, I was like, I could just see myself packing him around on my hip. He's going to be my little buddy. I'm going to just, squeeze him and love him and hug him and kiss him and spoil him and all the things. And then when he didn't survive, I had lots of questions. My mind was pretty, confused. My heart was shattered. My dad didn't quite know what to do with how to really get us through that moment. It was the first time we went through a real crisis that I didn't have my mom because she was very, very ill. And so my dad, if I was being honest, he just really didn't do a good job. He was a man of few words, and so he didn't really talk to us about, he was struggling himself. I realize that now, of course. And I had lots of questions about the why. Why, God? Why didn't you? I know you can. Why didn't you, make him survive? And I was even confused even beyond that because there was, my mother had spent about 2 months in the hospital prior to the baby passing away. She kept going into premature labor, and she had a roommate that was not well mentally, and she did not want her baby, and she was very bitter, and she would pound her stomach and wish this baby to be dead. And I witnessed that as a 12-year-old. And so to see her despise this little life that she's about to give birth to, and my mother fighting to save the one she's about to give birth to, and the other lady's baby survived and ours did not, I was beyond confused. And I asked lots of questions, and thank God there was our pastor that was there, Brother Charles Fannin, a wonderful man of God that just loves the Lord still to this day with all his heart. And he was there. He I could ask him anything, and he would offer, comfort, and he didn't always have answers, and he was very quick to say, I don't know. I don't know. I can't explain it. But he did encourage me to hang on to God. Don't get bitter with God. Hang on to God. And I did. And then we fast forward to really not much further. Really, this was all probably within maybe a 2-year time span. I'm not even sure that it was that long. My mother's sister had a baby that died. She had pneumonia. She was 5 months old, and she died. And then my uncle that lived next door, they had a baby that didn't survive. He died of SIDS. So these 3 baby deaths, all within a very short time span in my family. And I'm just saying, God, why? I don't understand. These are little babies and innocent and haven't even had a chance to live life. I just don't understand. And then one by one, I watched my dad give his life to the Lord, and I watched all of my uncles give their life to the Lord, my dad's brothers, and then my dad's one sister. Every single one of them, through that trial, came to know the Lord. I don't say God caused those things, but I do say God used those things to his glory. Because the word tells us that the enemy intends to do us harm, but God will use that for his glory. And I very clearly see that my dad and his whole entire family came to salvation through the painful experiences of these deaths that we had. And I'm pretty sure that any of you that in here that know me, I am the one in Scripture that where the Lord says, "Those who mourn will be comforted." We have had a vast amount of death. I see that, when you come from a big family that loves well, this is what happens. We all are destined to die. We know that. But I have wrestled with that time and again in my life. That has been probably my greatest struggle in my faith, is reconciling my reactions and my understanding with the whys, thinking about the what ifs or whatever. So fast forward that in 1995, so Kevin and I had gotten married. We'd had 2 children at this point, and my dad found out he had cancer. And we were living all the way, we're a military family, retired military family, so we've lived all over the world, but we had moved to Washington State, much to my unhappiness, because learning that my dad had cancer and knowing that we're so far away was really difficult. Living vicariously through the phone calls coming and from minute to minute to learn how things are going at home, and feeling guilty that I'm not there to help my brother with all the responsibilities and tasks. And my dad had lung surgery. I came home and was home for about 2 months and had to go back. And then a year, almost to the day, we learned his cancer was back, and my brother had called and said, "You probably really should come home." So once again, trekking across country to come home and see my dad suffering very, very severely, probably one of the most difficult things I've ever had to endure in all of my life. And again, asking God, why? Why, God? Why? I don't understand. We prayed so hard for his healing. And then I had, in the midst of this, literally 10 days probably before my dad died, we find out we have orders to Okinawa, Japan. I was really having quite a fit with the Lord, let's just say that. I did not want to go to Japan. I didn't want to even think about it. I didn't want to think about leaving my dad. I didn't want to think about leaving my mother. I just, was not in a good way. I was home with the 2 children again and living at the hospital with my dad. So my children were pretty much living with my aunt, which they'll tell you was a great thing. They had a great time with all of the kids. Kevin was still in Washington, and now he's living for those phone calls. However, the next phone call that was made was me begging him, "Please come home. My dad is not going to make it, and I need you to come home." And he did, and all the while we're battling this endless array of government red tape, trying to get a humanitarian reassignment closer to home, trying to get his career field to release him to accept another assignment that he had been accepted to, where he could do recruiter duty right in Conroe. And all of these things are all just muddled together. It's just, in the midst of me sitting up at the hospital for endless hours watching my dad suffer. Hospice has now gotten involved, and none of those things, they had told us that our orders were going to be canceled. We weren't going to have to go to Okinawa. And we breathed a sigh of relief for about a millisecond, and then learned that that was not going to happen. They were not going to cancel those orders. We were going to have to leave. And it was torture to think of leaving my mother. My dad has now passed away. We've had his funeral. Kevin goes back to Washington, and I'm just emotional, mental, spiritual mess. And the reality is I know that I have to go back to Washington, and I have to pack. And I have to pack for a nightmare move, let's just say that. It's a remote assignment when you go to Okinawa, so you can't take most of your belongings with you. So you're packing your suitcase that's going to go with you. You're packing what limited weight amount will be allowed to go with you in a shipment that will get there right away, and then another shipment that will get there eventually on literally a slow boat to China, and then your other belongings go into a climate-controlled storage unit for 3 years. And I am bitter. I am broken. I am grieving. I go back begrudgingly to Washington to start this nightmare move. And I am not in a good way. And I am not communicating with the Lord. I literally I didn't want to talk to God. I didn't want to hear about God. I didn't want to even know God existed. I was not in a good way. And Kevin was ever so patiently walking on eggshells, not knowing what to do with me or for me. And I can guarantee you he continued to pray for me. And I know there were others that were doing the same. I clearly know that without the prayers of the saints, I don't think I would have ever gotten through this moment. So the children and I are back. Kevin comes very quietly in and says, "Do you want to go to church?" No, just go. Go ahead, have fun. See ya. And he tiptoes out of the house, takes the children to church, and I am just, I don't even know, numb, really, I guess. And I'm in Canaan's room. Canaan at the time was still very young. And I'm in his room, and I'm putting things in boxes and suitcases and whatever, and I'm literally having a temper tantrum, honestly. That's just the way I describe it. And I'm talking out loud, and I am throwing things into the suitcase and throwing things into boxes, and I'm saying, "I'm so angry, so angry. I don't even know why this is happening. I don't know why I have to go to Japan, of all places, Lord. I never even wanted to go to Japan." Just having a fit. And I just continued to say, "I'm so angry." And I hear this voice, literally, like someone standing in the room with me, and he said, "Who are you angry with?" And I stopped, and I literally just began to weep, because at this point, I'm beyond tears. I have no tears. I have no, I've just bottled myself up. I'm not allowing myself to have any emotions whatsoever. And I dropped to my knees. Canaan was still sleeping in a toddler bed at the time. And I dropped to my knees, and I used that toddler bed like an altar. And I said, "God, I'm not angry with you. I love you more than anything in this world, Lord. But I can't do this. I cannot do this without you. I need you to go with me. I need you to carry me. I need you to walk with me. I need you to make a way for me, Lord, because I can't do this." And I just immediately felt such a release from all of that. And I cried, and I wept. And I feel like at that point I allowed my relationship with the Lord to be restored, because it was never God that left me. God never moved away from me. He still was right there the whole while. And he waited patiently for me to get through that moment. And he literally spoke to me so that I would have that breakthrough moment. And we went to Okinawa, and we met some of the most amazing people. We attended one of the most amazing churches. It was an experience of a lifetime. And lo and behold, God didn't make me stay there 3 years. We had a whirlwind of moves, in fact, over those years that when my dad was so ill. So we literally only stayed in Okinawa for 1 year. But we made some lifelong friends that are it says a friend that sticks closer than a brother. These are friends. Let me tell you, they are there, and they are still a huge part of our lives to this day. And my friend Leslie, when I arrived on island, they were the ones that we met first. We didn't know them from anyone, and they were definitely not. Military didn't send them to meet us. God sent them to meet us through a chain of events where Kevin's sponsor was a deadbeat loser that didn't ever show up at the airport, and we were stranded after flying for 24 hours, and we were so done, I was ready to sleep on the floor. These friends were the ones we met, and they are just amazing people. And I was just sharing my heart with Leslie, and I said, by this point, I am expecting our third child, and I'm just grieving the fact that my dad will never know him, and he will never know my dad. And she said, "You're wrong. He's going to know your dad." I'm looking at her like she's crazy. He's going to know your dad because you are going to share the stories, and you're going to talk about him, and it's just going to be as if he were there. And I will flat tell you, the last 3 children, because we've had 3 children after my dad passed, they do know my dad. Just true to her word, they know my dad because the stories we tell of his crazy sense of humor. He was such a prankster. And then, and quite a different man once he came to know the Lord. And amazing, loving, wonderful man of God that I don't remember a day after he came to the Lord that he didn't sit and read the Word. And so she was 100% correct in that assessment that my children that had been born after his death would know him. And so, I've watched the Lord, walk me through horrible, painful, trying times in my life. I've been saved for 51 years. I'm barely that old. I just want you to know that. But I turned 60 this year. And in those 51 years, I will say that a relationship with the Lord, it's no different than a relationship with anybody else. If you don't work on it, it's just going to go stagnant. If you don't, keep it alive through prayer and fasting and reading the Word, all those things that keep us connected, going to church. I find worship to be one of my greatest pleasures with the Lord. But life is just like the ocean; it ebbs and it tides, and the waves may crash in, and it may be glass smooth. That's life, and that is life for everyone. And I honestly don't know how people that don't know the Lord get through it. I really question, how do they ever manage to walk through this earth and have any kind of hope or any kind of peace or joy or anything else? Because it's tough. It's a hard world out there. But God is a good God. He is a faithful God. He is loving, kind, and generous. And I had to come to, realize that, death was never a part of his plan. His perfect plan in the Garden of Eden was to walk with us every day and talk with us and commune with us. And those things were broken through sin. And so, yes, we will endure hardships, and we will endure pain, and we will endure death and all the heartache that comes with that. But that doesn't mean that we don't have hope. That doesn't mean he doesn't love us. That doesn't mean he's turned his back on us. And no, I don't have all the answers for the whys and the what ifs. But now I don't expect to have them, I guess, like I did when I was a child. But I do have the hope that, through salvation, those that we've lost, it's just for a time. And we will see them again, and we will be reunited. And I can't imagine what that's going to be like. I keep saying, my dad and all his brothers, they must be up in heaven causing all kinds of havoc. I'm just saying, they were quite the pranksters. And I said, I'm just envisioning them up there yanking on angels' wings and trying to reconstruct their own mansions because they were all carpenters. So, we make jokes in the family like that. But, God is good, and He is, He's faithful to see us through every situation. We've been reading through the Bible, the 2-year plan, several of us here in the church, and just having gone through Job, it's just like, there's a lot I could relate to Job on there, and then it kind of came to my attention, like, I've read through it before. I guess I always was taught that Job was a faithful man, that, he just, endured all of his hardships, but apparently I was wrong about that. He got a little testy with God towards the end, and I said, I do relate to Job way, way more than I thought I did. So I love that God, he strategically places, I don't believe in coincidence, by the way, he strategically places people in our lives to speak words of encouragement to us, and he's always been good, very, very good to me in that way. And I'm very thankful that, I have my Haven family. They've seen me through some really, really, really tough moments. Scott has been just a godsend into my family as we've walked through death after death after death over these last several years. And I won't tell you that I grieve well. I don't. I'm terrible. I cry many, many tears, and I still say why. Why? And it's, God knows me. I'm not telling God anything He doesn't know. He already knows. And He just stands there, and He does this number, and He just waits for me to get a little more back in line where I'm supposed to be. So thankfully He's patient with me, and He loves me enough to wait patiently for me to get my head back on my shoulders straight. But I'm here to tell you that God never, ever stops loving us. There's nothing that you can do to separate yourself from God. His love is never ending. It's there from the beginning of time and will be there till the end of time. There's nothing that you've ever done that's bad enough for God to reject you. He's not going to do that. You are His child. You are important to Him, and He desires a relationship with you just like He does each and every one of us. So thank you. Appreciate it.